Good to know is that here we are now in the plenary session. This room is the Gasperi room, and all the plenary sessions during the day will take place here in this room. The parallel afternoon breakout sessions will take place either here or in other rooms in this building, on the ground floor or on the first floor. You will find the place where you have to go, again, on the back of this badge. I really think there's nothing that you need that you will not find on this badge. We have also made sure that there are clear signposts that will gently nudge, guide you to the locations of your breakout sessions. Also good to know and to stress is that in order to make most of your expertise, to make most of your insights, the panels that are taking place this afternoon will be interactive, so that you have the possibility to raise questions, make comments, make suggestions, etc. The keynote speeches will be live streamed. And then, of course, there is going to be, as I already mentioned, a networking buffet lunch, and that will take place on this floor. So in the back there, you will find all the nice tables for the lunch. Now, we here at the Commission, we have really thought of everything, which is one of the reasons that we have made sure that coffee is available throughout the day, all the day, and you will find coffee stands there in the back of the room. I know that this is a lot of information. You may still have any other questions on the practical arrangements. Do not hesitate to reach out to the people that are wearing badges with a white lanyard. Do we see them here? White lanyard. These are the people that know absolutely everything about the practical arrangements of today's conference. These are already waiting for our keynote speakers. A few of the housekeeping messages that I wanted to announce will be very shortly with you with the actual kickoff and the presentation of the keynote addresses by Commission President von der Leyen and Professor Draghi. So bear with us a few moments. Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning again and welcome again to this conference 1 year after the Draghi report. We can now officially kick off this important conference with our keynote addresses, and I would like to invite the Commission President to take the floor.
Dear Professor Draghi, caro Mario, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we mark 1 year since the Draghi report was released. But let me go back for a moment to 2 years ago, when I first called you, Mario, to propose that you embark on this new mission. And I remember you were intrigued by the offer, but you set one condition. You said this new report had to make a real difference. And you said you were not interested in writing, I quote you, another academic paper. You wanted a roadmap for action. And that was exactly what we are looking for. You and your team invested a full year to dig into Europe's strengths, into Europe's shortcomings, and how we could address them. And as soon as the report was out, all of Europe turned its ears to you. So first of all, I want to thank you, dear Mario, for your rigor, for your vision, and for your service to Europe. Grazie, Mario. My new Commission took office 9 months ago. The first act of the new mandate was our Competitiveness Compass. The Competitiveness Compass translates the report into practical policies. And then we hit the ground running with the Clean Industrial Deal, AI gigafactories, the new state aid framework, the Affordable Energy Plan, the Savings and Investment Union, tailor-made action plans for sectoral industries like the car industry, steel and chemicals, the greatest surge in defence investment in our history, new proposals on the single market, the Scale-up and Start-up Fund and Quantum, and 6 simplification packages on their way. This is the urgency mindset we promised. Now we have to convince our co-legislators because they have to agree, and we will relentlessly stay the course until we get it all done. But today, I do not want to focus on how many initiatives and strategies we've adopted. I want to focus on the real impact on the ground, because that's the one and only thing that really matters. We know that competitiveness is about jobs, it is about good salaries for people, it is about good profits for companies, it's basically about our European way of life. And I want to address one by one the 3 pillars of the Draghi report. The first one is closing the innovation gap. The second is the joint plan for decarbonization and competitiveness. And the third pillar is reducing our dependencies. Let me start with innovation. And let me start with the positive before I come to the challenges. Today, the global competition for technological leadership is being fundamentally reshaped by artificial intelligence. And this new AI race has only just begun. So global leadership is still up for grabs. And Europe is not only a challenger, but a leader in many fields that will define that race. Take computing power, for example. Europe has some of the best supercomputers in the world. And even though tech giants across the world continue to build larger and faster computers, we have managed to strengthen our global ranking. Just to give you a few figures, 6 years ago, we had 2 supercomputers in the global top 10. Then at the beginning of my first mandate, we decided to massively invest in high-performance computing. Today, we have 4 supercomputers in the global top 10, thanks to the launch in the last year of Jupiter in Germany and HPC 6 in Italy. So our policies and investments in this field are starting to pay off. My second point is that Europe is well positioned in the world of AI adoption. We have started using AI to boost productivity, and I mention that because this is precisely where Europe had failed 30 years ago, when our companies were too slow to digitalize and to go online. This time, Europe is not playing catch-up. We are among the front runners. European companies are top of the league on many AI applications. And I think it's good to look at one impressive example, that is Lovable, the Swedish app. It's an app that turns ideas into fully functioning apps for websites. Last summer, Lovable became the fastest software company in history to reach $100 million in annual revenue. Today, it is valued almost $4 billion. Last June, 10% of all new websites in the world were made with Lovable. This is just one example, but there are many other European AI success stories, from healthcare to defense. I know that the French champion Mistral is here with us today. In 2025, the number of European businesses adopting AI has risen by 67% year on year. So this is where we can truly engage in this race. But we need to capitalize on our strength. We need to put our digital infrastructure at the service of industry and innovators. And this brings me back to the supercomputers, the infrastructure. We have created AI factories, and we will soon be upgrading the best of them into gigafactories. And the aim is that our amazing innovative startups can access this computing power and can test and train their models, especially thinking about sectorial applications. And the response of the private sector in Europe has been impressive. Our initial goal was to mobilize around about 20 billion euros in investment to develop the gigafactories. We received 230 billion euros in proposals from the private sector. And later today, during this conference, we will sign the first pilot projects. Of course, the rest of the world is racing too. We also know that global investments are skyrocketing. So we must stay focused. We must put our shoulder to the wheel. This is not a mission accomplished. This is the mission of the next decade, to make Europe one of the leading AI continents. And in your report, Mario, you said we need to create a virtuous circle where investment feeds innovation and innovation attracts more investment. And this is the core idea behind our new Competitiveness Fund. It will be the centerpiece of the next European budget, with a proposed firepower of over 400 billion euros. That includes a rise of twice more money for research, the 170 billion we have prepared for Horizon Europe, 5 times more money than today for digital, 6 times more for clean tech. I think this is an investment to boost our industry that Europe needs now, and we are here to convince now European Parliament and European Council of the value of this investment. Now, coming to the challenges. Of course, I know how many obstacles still remain. Take an AI startup from Portugal or from Romania. They must be able to grow seamlessly across our continent, but we know that this is not the case. Our single market is far from being completed. You know the famous number that the IMF has calculated. The internal barriers within the single market are an equivalent of 45% tariffs on goods, and if it comes to services, 110% tariffs on services if we look at the effect these internal barriers have on our single market. This cannot be. It should not be easier to find a fortune across an ocean than across a European border. And we have started to address these barriers. We have addressed them with the so-called Terrible 10, with our single market strategy. But now we must deliver with a matter of urgency, and this is why we have announced a single market roadmap to 2028. The aim is here to increase the pace and to speed up the processes. And this roadmap will connect our work on capital markets, on services, on energy, on telecoms, on the fifth freedom for knowledge and innovation, as well as the 28th regime for the innovative companies, with concrete timelines, deadlines, goals to reach. Because we all know only what gets measured gets done. Ladies and gentlemen, the second pillar of the Draghi report is a joint plan for decarbonization and competitiveness. That starts with bringing down energy costs. We know the core reason why we pay higher bills than our competitors. Europe is too dependent on imported fossil fuels. And this means that the cost of our energy is dictated by global markets. But we also know the solution. And this is homegrown energy, renewables with nuclear as a base load. That gives us energy security. That gives us independence as it is homegrown, and actually it creates good jobs in Europe. And in the last year alone, we have achieved impressive progress. First, we launched a wind package that is cutting permitting times by 2/3. In the first half of 2025, investment in Europe, in European wind energy, hit an all-time high, more than 40 billion euros. So investors are choosing Europe. And another good news, by now over 70% of our electricity comes from low-carbon sources. As a result, last year, we reduced our fossil fuel bill by over 60 billion euros. So we have to cut prices and dependencies at the same time. But let me be very clear. Our energy prices remain still far too high, too volatile, too disparate across Europe. In some member states, electricity costs are 3 times more than in others. And many price spikes could be avoided if energy could flow more freely to where it is needed. But we also know that national grids are still not well integrated. Too often we lack the necessary interconnectors, or we don't make efficient use of those we have. Now, we have started to address this. Just last week, the European Parliament has approved our proposal to use cohesion funds to boost energy infrastructure. Many projects are already advancing. We have, for example, the Celtic interconnector that will soon end Ireland's isolation from the European grid. Or we have the Biscay Bay project to double capacity between France and Spain. And in addition, we will propose a grids package and a new energy highways initiative that will focus on 8 critical bottlenecks that we have identified in our energy infrastructure. So from the Pyrenees to the Trans-Balkan pipeline, from the Øresund Strait to the Sicilian Canal, we will liberate these bottlenecks one by one, and we will step up with funding where necessary. Mario, you dedicated a chapter to the clean transition. It is a vast opportunity for our industries. The global market for batteries is expected to double, for example, in size over the next 5 years. The global market for wind turbines continues to rise by over 10% every year. And the global market for electric cars is booming. If you look at the European Union, sales are up almost 25% year on year. If you look across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, the electric vehicle sales rose by 60% in 2024. So this is, first of all, good news for the climate. But the question is, do we want to reap the economic benefits of it, or do we want others to take a growing share of these rising new markets? And I have not the slightest doubt about the answer. Because when I speak to the Global South, from Africa to India to Central Asia, they are all suffering from climate change. They are all looking for solutions. And Europe can be home to front-runner industries that can export exactly these solutions to others. So we should be the industrial powerhouse that meets this growing demand for clean tech. We know that this is not a given. We know that the figures are not as encouraging as in other sectors. Too often we are losing jobs and market share to non-market economies. But we can still turn the tide. And this is why we have to massively boost our public and private investment. This is why we have to create lead markets for circular and clean products. And this is why we have to secure level playing fields for our industries. Europe must protect its industries. They are front runners in the race to decarbonize. They are doing the right thing. And they should be incentivized and rewarded. Otherwise, we risk again to rely on others to import the steels our car makers need, or we rely on others to import the cement our builders need. And we would again be at the mercy of price, volume and quality that others are willing and able to provide. And this is why we have to focus on the sectors that are the most strategic for us. With the Clean Industrial Deal, for example, we're tackling the main hurdles that slow these sectors down. We are, for example, working on a battery booster package, as batteries are a key enabler of all other clean tech. This will put 1.8 billion euros up for equity to expand production in Europe. So this work goes to the heart of Europe's independence. And that leads me, ladies and gentlemen, to the third pillar in the Draghi report, independence, or let's say dependencies, as you called it. In this last year, we have seen export controls from China bringing production lines in Europe to a halt. Today, a single country controls 75% of the processing of cobalt, 90% for rare earth, 100% for graphite. And this is a critical situation without any doubt. But as always in life, there is nothing that is inevitable. So with the right policies, we can shore up our security. It will take time. But that's the path to build independence. And this is what Europe is up to today. First, with diversification. We can look at other markets. In the last year alone, we have reached new trade deals, as you know, with Mercosur, with Mexico, with Switzerland. The agreement with Mercosur, for instance, will create a market of 770 million consumers. It's 1/4 of the global GDP. We secured an initial agreement with a mining giant like Indonesia. We're now in talks with India, and we want to conclude before the end of the year. Strong political commitment on my side, strong political commitment on Modi's side. We're advancing with South Africa, Malaysia and United Arab Emirates, just to name a few. Our economic security has a crucial role in all of these trade deals. And we know that together with trade comes investment, We're securing or building networks of strategic projects across the world. Let me give you two examples. For example, nickel in Canada. That is enough to power over 800,000 electric vehicle batteries every year. Or we have agreed with Kazakhstan graphite for 100,000 electric vehicles batteries every year. Or look at the strategic Lobito corridor to Africa's copper belt. All these are the first successful moves to diversify and important steps to our independence. Of course, and I don't want to neglect that one, our work on economic security and independence begins right here at home. So this year we selected 47 strategic projects across Europe under our Critical Raw Materials Act, and we will focus our financial support on these critical endeavours, and we will ensure that all the permitting is done in due time. So I'm speaking of copper and cobalt mining in Finland, for example. I'm speaking of lithium processing in Portugal, or the battery recycling in Italy. Let me focus in particular on recycling. The circular economy is central to our security of supply. Just let me give you three figures. Already today, every kilogram of raw materials, if you take it, we produce 33% more output than the United States and 400% more output than China. Just think about the potential competitive advantage if we manage to scale up this. So the best answer here is creating a truly circular economy. So we are working on a Circular Economy Act. And what we will do is we will start in those sectors that are already ready, like the batteries, for example, because we know that circular production limits our strategic dependency and, more important even, it enables front-runner industries that can export the solutions I was just talking about to others. So we can literally turn waste into the critical enabler of our competitiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude with a final example on reducing our dependencies. And there is another vital sector where we can no longer afford to be excessively reliant on others, and that is defense. Of course, a more independent Europe of defense won't happen overnight. And I want to say right at the beginning, there's a strong alignment with NATO. But it is also crystal clear that Europe must now carry the lion's share of its own security. And this is why we have launched Readiness 2030 to mobilize up to 800 billion euros in defense investment. And this includes, these 800 billion euros include 150 billion euros for an instrument we call SAFE. That's an instrument for joint procurement for the member states. It is on track to be the most successful instrument on defense, and it took only 72 days to approve the SAFE loans. From the idea and the launch, our proposal to the approval, 72 days. And in less than 6 months, we have already assigned the total amount of 150 billion euros in loans. I think this is an example that shows that is the sense of urgency we need. And I wish I could see the same sense of urgency all across our competitiveness agenda. We need urgent action to face urgent needs, because our companies and workers can no longer wait. Take our simplification efforts. In every meeting I have with business, it's always their top request, and rightly so. And in the 9 months we have presented 6 simplification packages. You know, we call them omnibuses. Two more are on their way, that will be on the digital and on the military mobility. They will make a real difference, with less paperwork, less overlaps, less complex rules. Our proposal will cut 8 billion euros a year of bureaucratic costs for European companies. But it has already been a long time since the omnibuses hit the road. Now they need to reach their destination. They need an urgent approval by the co-legislators. And the same goes for many other proposals. From the Savings and Investment Union to several trade agreements. Of course, we also, in the Commission, have to do our homework. Just to mention one example, that is competition policy. We have discussed an overhaul of the competition policy for a while. So the direction of travel is clear. And that's why we will have to advance the publication of the merger guidelines. I think it's now time to deliver. And I'm absolutely convinced that Europe can unite around this agenda. Every single member state has endorsed the Draghi report, and so has the European Parliament. We all know what needs to be done. We all know that business as usual does not work anymore. And this is my final message today. This is also what the people of Europe expect from us. They expect our democracy to decide, to act, and to deliver. And I know that Europe can make it, because we have already shown what is possible. We can move mountains when we have the ambition, the unity, and the urgency. It's our choice, so let us make that choice again, for prosperity, for independence, and in general for Europe. Thank you very much, and long live Europe.
Thank you very much, President von der Leyen. May I now ask Professor Draghi to join us on the stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Ursula, thank you very much for your kind words at the beginning of this conversation, but also thank you for having given me the opportunity to serve Europe, which I try to do at my best. 1 year ago, we met here to discuss 3 challenges set out in the report. Europe's growth model had long been under strain. Dependencies threatened its resilience. And without faster growth, Europe would be unable to deliver on its climate, digital, and security ambitions, not to mention finance its aging societies. Over the past year, each of these challenges has grown more acute. The foundations of Europe's growth, expanding world trade and high-value exports, have weakened further. The US has imposed its highest tariffs since the Smoot-Hawley era. China has become an even stronger competitor, both in third markets and as US tariffs divert flows inside Europe itself. Since December last year, China's trade surplus with the European Union has risen by almost 20%. We've also seen how Europe's ability to respond is limited by its dependencies, even when our economic weight is and remains considerable. Reliance on the US for defense was quoted as one of the reasons we had to accept a trade deal largely on American terms. Dependence on Chinese critical materials has curtailed our ability to prevent China's overcapacity from flooding Europe or to counter its support for Russia. Europe has begun to respond. Since the US absorbs around 3/4 of the global current account deficit, diversifying away from its market is unrealistic in the short term. But, for example, the Mercosur deal with Latin America can offer relief for exporters. The Commission has launched strategic projects for critical raw materials, and defence spending is rising sharply. These defence commitments, however, add to already vast financing needs. The ECB now puts annual investment requirements for 25-31 at nearly 1.2 trillion, up from 800 billion a year ago. The public share has almost doubled, from 24% to 43%, an extra $500 billion a year, as defence is mainly publicly funded. Fiscal space is scarce, and without this new spending, EU public debt is set to rise 10 percentage points over the next decade, reaching 93% of GDP on growth assumptions that are more optimistic than what it is at the present day. 1 year on, Europe is therefore in a harder place. Our growth model is fading, vulnerabilities are mounting, and there is no clear path to finance the investments we need. And we've been reminded painfully that inaction threatens not only our competitiveness, but also our sovereignty. The report set out 3 priorities for Europe: closing the innovation gap in advanced technologies, charting a decarbonisation path that supports growth, and strengthening economic security. As President von der Leyen has underlined, these are also at the heart of the Commission's agenda, and I welcome her decision to place competitiveness at the centre, and the programme is ambitious. Europe's citizens and companies value the diagnosis, the clear priorities, and the action plans. But they also express growing frustration. They are disappointed by how slowly the EU moves. They see us failing to match the speed of change elsewhere. They are ready to act, but fear governments have not grasped the gravity of the moment. Too often, excuses are made for our slowness. We say it's simply how the EU is built, that a complex process with many actors must be respected. Sometimes, inertia is even presented as respect for the rule of law. I think that's complacency. Competitors in the US and China are far less constrained, even when acting within the law. To carry on as usual is to resign ourselves to falling behind. A different path demands new speed, scale, and intensity. It means acting together, not fragmenting our efforts. It means focusing resources where impact is greatest. And it means delivering results within months, not years. Start with technology. AI is often called a transformational technology, like electricity 140 years ago. But it depends on the orchestration of at least 4 other technologies: cloud to store vast data, supercomputing to process that data, cybersecurity to protect sensitive sectors, and advanced networks, 5G, fiber, satellites for transmission. In some of these areas, Europe shows progress. Plans are underway for at least 5 AI gigafactories each with more than 100,000 advanced GPUs. Data center capacity is set to triple over the next 7 years. A major telecom reform is expected by year-end. ASML's recent investment in Mistral is a promising signal for domestic AI ecosystem. Adoption is rising too. As the President just reminded us, the EIB finds European firms are taking up advanced technologies at the pace close to US peers, though from a lower base. But the gaps are stark. On the AI frontier, the US produced 40 large foundation models last year, China 15, the EU just 3. Among SMEs, AI adoption is still low, ranging from 13 to 21%, and in the most strategic field, AI built on European intellectual property to anchor our core industry, progress is minimal. There are 3 areas where more ambition is needed. First, as the President has remarked before, removing barriers to scaling up new technologies. A true 28th regime must become reality, allowing innovative firms to operate, trade and raise financing seamlessly across all 27 member states, just as competitors can in other large economies. This is especially important to give young Europeans a chance in their continent. They want to stay here. They don't want to go elsewhere to have success. The Commission is moving in this direction, but with uncertain backing from Member States, the first step towards the 28th regime will likely be limited to a digital business identity. Early-stage funding also needs stronger backing. The Scale Up Europe Fund can help startups grow if its size matches their financial needs. The planned increase of Horizon Europe to 175 billion is welcome, but for breakthrough research, this will fall short unless the additional resources are concentrated into sizable priority programs. Resources must flow into centres of excellence. They must focus on high-risk, high-reward projects chosen through a DARPA-style process. They must be reinforced by strong industry linkages to academic institutions to turn research into real applications. Implementation must rest with expert project managers, not bureaucrats. And Europe should be capable of making direct investments in a few large strategic deep tech initiatives. The second area is regulation. Across European companies, one of the clearest demands is for a radical simplification of GDPR. Not just the primary law, but also the heavy gold plating by member states. Training AI models requires vast amounts of public web data. Yet, legal uncertainty over its use creates costly delays, slowing deployment in Europe. Research backs this up. GDPR has raised the cost of data by about 20% for EU firms compared with US peers. Yet the only change on the table so far is an easing of record keeping and extending SMEs' derogations to meet caps. Broader reform towards simpler, harmonized rules is still vague. The AI Act is another source of uncertainty. The first rules, which included the ban on unacceptable risk systems, landed without major complications. Codes of practice signed by most major developers, together with the Commission's August guidelines, have clarified responsibilities. But the next stage covering high-risk AI systems in areas like critical infrastructure and health must be proportionate and support innovation and development. In my view, implementation of this stage should be paused until we better understand the drawbacks. More broadly, enforcement should rest on ex-post assessment, judging models by their real-world capabilities and demonstrated risks. The third area is the vertical integration of AI into industry. Sectoral AI applications are even more critical than raw supercomputing power. Here, Europe has a real advantage. Its firms hold more than half the global market in industrial automation solutions, a cornerstone of industrial AI. Yet only around 10% of manufacturing firms used AI last year. Industry and governments must work together to turn this head start into proprietary European solutions. The Commission's Apply AI strategy this autumn will be a key test. Natural gas prices in the EU are still nearly 4 times higher than in the United States. Industrial power prices are on average more than double. Unless this gap narrows, the transition to high-tech economy will stall. Energy is as fundamental as technology in driving AI. Electricity demand by data centers in Europe will rise by 70% in 2030. Power already accounts for up to 40% of their operating costs. The IEA warns that without action, 1 in 5 planned projects globally could be delayed by grid bottlenecks. Only countries that align energy strategy with the grid package due at the end of this year and the proposed budget increase for cross-border links are a step forward. But the current system, national coordination of permits and financing, is not fit for a European energy market. Cross-border projects need EU-level planning and execution. At the same time, we must be realistic. These measures will not cut energy prices quickly. That is why we must act on the levers that can deliver faster relief. 2 stand out: improving the functioning of gas markets and loosening the grip of gas on electricity prices. Europe is already the world's largest buyer of US LNG and has committed to purchase up to $750 billion in US energy products. Whatever the conditions of that deal, it should be treated as a chance to reorganize how we purchase gas. Since March, LNG landed in Europe has cost from 60 to 90% more than the same gas would cost in the United States, even after accounting for logistics and regasification. Collective EU purchasing, as first proposed by the Commission after Russia's invasion, could certainly narrow this gap by strengthening our bargaining power, reducing intermediaries' margins, and shielding us from volatile spot markets. In parallel, Europe must deliver on the work of Gas Market Task Force and bring more transparency to energy trading. Profits for the 4 largest global traders quadrupled between 20 and 22. Joint supervision and a stronger rule book are overdue. We must then decouple the remuneration of renewables and nuclear from fossil generation by expanding contracted energy, meaning purchasing power agreements and 2-way contracts for difference. Some useful initiatives are underway, such as the EIB's pilot PPA, Purchasing Power Agreement, guarantee. But far more decisive action is needed. Long-term contracts must be extended to all renewables and nuclear assets, new as it is today, but also existing alike. The current mechanism for setting prices simply awards huge rents to many vested interests. As we press ahead with decarbonisation, the transition must also be flexible and pragmatic. The Commission has eased some of the most onerous reporting requirements through its omnibus on sustainability. But in some sectors, such as automotives, targets rest on assumptions that no longer hold. The 2035 deadline for zero tailpipe emissions was meant to trigger a virtuous circle. Firm targets would drive investment in charging infrastructure, grow the home market, spur innovation in Europe, and make EV models, electric vehicles models, cheaper. Adjacent industries, batteries, chips, were expected to develop alongside, supported by targeted industrial policy. But this hasn't happened. Charging point installation must accelerate 3- to 4-fold in the next 5 years to reach adequate coverage. The EV market has grown more slowly than expected. European innovation has lagged, models remain expensive, and supply chain is fragmented. In fact, the European car fleet of 250 million vehicles is aging, and CO2 emissions have barely fallen in recent years. As suggested in the report, the upcoming review of the CO2 emissions regulation should follow a technological neutral approach and take stock of market and technological developments. We also need a joint-up approach to the ramp-up of EVs, covering supply chains, infrastructure needs, and the potential of carbon-neutral fuels. In the coming months, the automotive sector will test Europe's ability to align regulation, infrastructure, and supply chain development into a coherent strategy for an industry, let's not forget, that employs more than 13 million people across the value chain. The report called for using industrial policy actively to cut dependencies and guard against state-sponsored competition. At the time, concerns were raised about economic nationalism, protectionism, and the risk that Europe might abandon global rules. But the past year has shown clearly that we are operating in a different world. The line between economy and security is increasingly blurred. States are using every tool at their disposal to advance their interests. So far, Europe's response has fallen into two traps: uncoordinated national efforts or blind faith that market force will build new sectors. The first can never deliver scale. The second is impossible when others distort markets and tilt the level playing field. Instead, we must build the capacity to defend ourselves and withstand pressure at key choke points: defense, heavy industry, and the technologies that will shape the future. 3 levers can give us the scale and intensity we need. The first is a new approach to coordinating state aid. In practice, state aid often acts as protectionism, locking activity within borders instead of building European industries that are globally competitive. IMF research shows that aid in one country often comes at the expense of growth in its neighbours. Europe does have coordination tools, such as important projects of common European interest. which can focus support and reduce these spillovers. Yet, in 2023, EU countries spent nearly €190 billion on state aid, 5 times more than has been allocated to IPCI since 2018. Used strategically, IPCIs could help Europe achieve scale in sectors like innovative nuclear technologies, such as small modular reactors, or in the automotive supply chain for affordable zero and low-emission vehicles. The Commission is taking measures to make such projects more attractive and accessible. But the EPCI model is still essentially national in design and funding, and this creates an inherent ceiling compared to our competitors. Take Europe's semiconductor IPCI approved in 2023. It mobilized €80 billion of public funding spread across 14 member states, 68 projects, and 56 companies. The overarching target, reaching a 20% global share of semiconductor manufacturing by 2030, is one the European Court of Auditors already calls very unlikely. As a comparison, take Japan's Rapidus shows a different approach. Created in 2022, it channels $12 billion of public support, despite Japan's smaller economy, into a single large-scale leader in advanced chips. It is focused on clear objectives, backed by major firms as investors and anchor customers. And it moves far faster, aiming for mass production by 2027. Europe should learn from this concentrated model and extend it to other advanced technologies, combining public and private investment for disruptive innovation and large-scale industrial projects. The second lever is public procurement. State aid cannot build new supply in critical technologies without matching European demand. Regulation can help by removing barriers to adoption, but procurement is the most powerful tool to create markets. It works in two ways. With total public procurement equal to 16% of EU GDP, directing even a small share to European industries would create stable demand for innovation and strengthen strategic sectors. Second, in industries where scale is decisive, harmonized rules can drive standardization and sustain long capital-intensive investment cycle. The potential is clear across many sectors. Reserving an EU share in defence chip procurement, supporting European cloud and vertical AI, or setting quotas for clean tech products such as green steel and aluminum. Work has begun on preferential EU procurement rules for the public sector, though details still are unclear. But success will depend on harmonization across member states. Without it, procurement, like state aid, risks sliding into national protectionism and failing to deliver the necessary scale. The third lever is competition policy. Here I will basically reiterate what the President just said. In defence and space and the dual-use technologies that underpin them, market dynamics are very different from consumer markets. Here, consolidation is not necessarily a threat to consumers. It can be a way to cut duplicated R&D, lower costs, accelerate innovation, and focus procurement budgets. Competitors in US and Asia benefit not only from state support and vast procurement markets, but also from consolidation in these sectors. Yet Europe remains split between multiple national champions and overlapping industrial bases. Europe should be able to protect competition while still promoting consolidation and innovation. A review of merger guidelines is underway, but industry can't wait until 2027. By the way, this deadline is actually consistent with the procedure that was chosen originally. Resilience and innovation must be built into competition policy now. At a minimum, a fast-track process should be established immediately. The next question is, how do we increase speed? In some areas, the EU can do more with the powers it already has. Regulation is where the Union can act fastest and most decisively. Europe has long styled itself as a regulatory power. It must now prove it can adapt to a fast-changing technological landscape. In other areas, deeper reform is needed, of competences, decision-making and financing. Ultimately, in some crucial areas, Europe must act less like a confederation and more like a federation. But such reform will take time we may not have. In the meantime, progress may depend on coalitions of the willing, using mechanisms such as enhanced cooperation. Even without treaty change, Europe could already go much further by concentrating projects and pooling resources. If we succeed in focusing our efforts in this way, the logical next step is to consider common debt for common projects, whether at EU level or among a coalition of member states, to amplify the benefits of coordination. Joint issuance would not magically expand fiscal space, but it would allow Europe to finance larger projects in areas that lift productivity, breakthrough innovation, scale technologies, defence R&D, or energy grids, where fragmented national spending can no longer deliver. By raising output faster than interest costs, such projects will gradually restore fiscal space and make broader investment needs easier to finance. The report estimated that even a modest 2% increase in total factor productivity over a decade could cut public finance burden by 1/3. And if we lower barriers in the single market and let firms scale faster, we will also accelerate the growth of European capital markets. These can help finance the private share of investment needs. In substance, the more we push reforms, and this is a point I made several times, the more we push reforms, the more private capital will step up and the less public money we will need. Of course, this path will break long-standing taboos, but the rest of the world has already broken theirs. For Europe's survival, we must do what has not been done before and refuse to be held back by self-imposed limits. Most importantly, we must move beyond broad strategies and backloaded timelines. We need concrete dates and deliverables, and to be held accountable for them. Deadlines should be ambitious enough to demand real focus and collective effort. This was the formula behind Europe's most successful projects, the single market and the euro. Both advanced through clear phases, firm milestones, and sustained political commitment. And I will conclude on the same lines as Ursula a moment ago. Europe's citizens are asking that their leaders raise their eyes from their daily concerns towards their common European destiny and grasp the scale of the challenge. Only unity of intent and urgency of response will show that they are ready to meet extraordinary times with extraordinary action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Draghi, and thank you very much again, President von der Leyen.